Welcome back to Old School Sports and our Out of the Park Baseball 25 series, Can We Save the Oakland A's? And we are a little past the midway point in the 2028 season. Our A's have been playing better of late, but we are still 39 and 54 overall, so another disappointing season on the field at the major league level for our Oakland Athletics. The big event in this episode is going to be the first year player draft, which is today, and that's what we will focus on. And by virtue of having the fourth worst record in baseball last year and then getting a bit lucky in the draft lottery, our Oakland A's are picking number 2 overall behind only the New York Yankees in this upcoming draft, which would normally be something I'd be incredibly excited about. And I still am pleased that we have that opportunity, but with the number 2 overall pick, I would like to be in a situation where there's 3 players that I really like, that I think stand out over everyone else in the draft. Even if the Yankees take one of them, I'm still going to have a choice at 2 players that I'm really in love with, and kind of have a pretty clear plan as to what I'm going to do. And unfortunately, I do not feel that way at all. I feel like there's probably a dozen different players I could make a case for, which makes me feel like the number 2 overall pick this year is a bit of a waste. And although I know some of our viewers have very strong opinions on what we should do in this draft, particularly as far as pitchers and college players seem to be the strongest emotions that I've heard from viewers. As of the time I'm doing this episode, I've gotten 9 different players recommended to me that we should potentially take number 1 overall. So when it all comes down to it, I think that our worldwide scouting team is kind of as perplexed by what to do in this draft as I am. I do feel like there's a pretty good chance, given it's, although at the very top end, I don't love the draft, it seems like it's a pretty deep draft. So I think there's a reasonable chance that one of the guys, and probably multiple guys that we're going to be talking about picking number 2 overall, may fall to us with our next pick at number 39. And certainly getting 2 of these 10 or 12 guys that we like would make the fact that the number 2 overall pick is going to be a real interesting and difficult decision for me potentially sting a little bit less. I hate to sound like I'm complaining about the number 2 overall pick, because I am pleased that we have it. Clearly wish that we were picking last by virtue of having had the best record in baseball and then going and winning it all in the World Series, but haven't been anywhere close to doing that with this Oakland A's team. So normally when I start these episodes, I have a pretty good idea of who I want to pick. Does not always end up that I pick that player. Sometimes as I talk through the decisions and talk through the recommendations from viewers, pushes me in a different direction. But I have absolutely no clue who we are going to end up taking number 2 overall as we begin this draft. The only thing I'm feeling a little positive about is that hopefully the Yankees will take one of the players that I like and make that decision for me slightly easier than it's going to be. And given that, I guess if I want to make the decision slightly easier, then what I really should do is go ahead and see who the Yankees are going to pick number 1 overall. And there is one player off the board, and it's Ben Giddens, and he was one of the most popular recommendations by our worldwide scouting department. John Maloney, Samuel Overend, Noglegs, Jarek Braxton, Stanley Rosella all mentioned him. He is a reasonable proxy for Deshaun Seifu For those of you who watched our Buffalo Wings series in OOTP 24, great personality, excellent speed, really good contact hitter, well above average gap power. He's got more home run power than Seifu ever had, at least potentially. Didn't love that he was kind of a man without a position, but won't be a factor for us now because one of the dozen or so players that I was intrigued by is officially off the board, with Beer Barrel Giddens going to the Yankees, number 1 overall. And as it turned out, even with the fact that Giddens was popular with a lot of viewers, a lot more pitchers that people are interested in than the position players. So we'll go through the position players first. Mike Little is a guy who both Noglegs and DLL First Base 14 mentioned. Not surprisingly to have Noglegs mentioning him, because Mike Little's profile looks very similar to Hidero Endo, who Noglegs / Dralix / Darkosis was one of the biggest fans of us signing this past off season. You could argue that Little could be a potentially better player. Potentially has better contact, potentially is going to strike out a little less, potentially has a similar eye, much better gap power, better speed, and also a pretty interesting defensive infielder. I think he could be a Gold Glove caliber third baseman, could also play second or short, although not particularly good with the pivot at second base. And also could play left or right field. So a lot of options for him, a pretty interesting bat. He's a college player, so in theory he's closer to being major league quality, but right now his ability to actually make contact and not strike out at an incredible pace is a concern. Taking a look at the ACL, even as a 21-year-old, his contact and his avoid strikeout ratings are a little below average. I do like the fact that he's not looking for a ton of money. As I mentioned, I think there's a pretty good chance that a guy that we really like is going to end up falling to us in the second round. And because of that, I wouldn't mind if we save a little bit of money in the first round. He's certainly in the mix. I probably don't love him as much as others, but he's definitely an intriguing player. And I will say that one house rule that I do allow myself, if we're making trades over this next month, which with 3 weeks till the trade deadline, we probably will. If I get money back in a trade, I will let myself put that into the budget room for drafted players. Not going to likely make a significant difference. We're clearly not going to be able to sign a guy making a guy requesting $13.5 million, followed by a guy requesting $9.5 million in the second round. But it could potentially give us a little more flexibility. But certainly picking someone like Little, who's not looking for much money, would help with that as well. Right fielder Bobby Cabral, pretty similar profile. Not as good gap power, not as much speed, competent defensively, out of Cal Poly San Luis Obispo. Looking for more money. Like him as well, but do think if I was going to go with a player with that profile, I'd probably go with Little over Cabral, given that they're similar players. I think I like Little a bit more, and he's also better defensively at potentially more important defensive positions. Steve Brown is another guy that was talked about in the comments to the last episode. Stanley Rosella likes him. Looks like he can be kind of a guy who's above average at everything. Above average contact and gap power and eye, really good home run power, above average speed, little above average for a defensive corner outfielder. has the high work ethic. Probably a potentially safer pick with that work ethic and adaptability, and the fact that he seems like he's going to be a pretty well-rounded player than a lot of other high schoolers. Number 2 overall seems a little ambitious to me, but I think I'm going to be able to say that and probably feel that way about just about everybody that I talk about. Ultimately, we're going to end up having to make a selection at number 2 overall, and it's probably going to be someone that I'd feel a lot better taking number 10 overall. But I'm not going to have that choice. Moving into the 5-star potential position players, and there weren't as many strong opinions on these. A couple people mentioned Dan Donahue and Joe Gerhardt, among large lists of players to think about, but there weren't as many strong opinions on these guys, interestingly. Terrell Stomer, another guy with a very similar profile to the ones we've seen, the contact and avoid strikeouts, potentially a challenge. Not much speed, not much defense, only a high schooler. I think if I was going to go with Daegu Otani, you probably go with little over him. At least I probably would. Center fielder Jimmy Simpson is more like a Steve Brown type in that he is very well balanced, really stands out with the potential power, solid defensively, solid speed, not exceptional at anything, only looking for slot, and does have the high work ethic. I guess he is exceptional potentially with the power, but everything else he's kind of middle of the road or a little better than normal. Bubba Murray, second baseman, potentially incredible power and an incredible eye, looking for a ton of money. Man kind of without a position, so could play him at left field, maybe try him at first base, but you'd really be kind of reliant on him as a DH. I think a high schooler who projects as a designated hitter, probably not a direction that I'm going to go down, although certainly when you look at his gap power, and eye combination, might be the best that we see in this entire draft. Mitch McLaren, a catcher who's definitely got home run power, not that great defensively, not looking for a ton of money, but if I'm going to take a catcher number 2 overall, it's got to be someone who brings the goods defensively as well as has a bat like McLaren's. Mike Geisel, first baseman, another pretty well-balanced guy, good power, draw a lot of walks, no speed, lack of defense. If he's around in the second round, I'd lap him up in a second, but number 2 overall, I probably want someone who can help me in more than just one facet of the game. Now, Geisel can certainly help with his bat, but I think there's plenty of other guys there who can help with their bat who might also bring something in the field or on the base paths that Geisel doesn't. Joe Gerhardt, third baseman. Only concern with him is the money, $13.5 million. So it would be very tricky for us to fill out the rest of our class, particularly with the hope that we have that someone interesting falls to us in the second round. But that bat is, in my opinion, the best pure bat in this draft. I know when you're looking at a guy with potential for 65 contact, 80 power, with above average gap power and eye, who's durable, that's not necessarily an incredibly bold statement, but don't love him defensively, don't love him on the base paths, and he does have a fair amount of negative personality traits. So I'm not going to take a guy with low work ethic, low leadership, number 2 overall, unless I see him as just a blue chip, can't miss prospect, and I don't think Gerhardt is that type of guy. Dan Donahue, pretty interesting, really good contact, really good power, average or better at everything else. Not a lot of speed, not that great on the base paths, and looking for a fair amount of money. So I have a feeling, and I think that it's conceivable that one of these guys that we're talking about, if not multiple of these guys, might slide to the second round. Certainly no guarantees, but I'm not even talking about some of these other four-star players that I haven't even looked through online. I've looked through these guys offline just to make sure. Jeremy McIntosh, the personality there is incredibly attractive to me. Love the speed. Love his ability to just dump hits and extra base hits all over the field. Okay defensively, not looking for a ton of money. I'd love it if he was around in the second round, and I do think that there will be perhaps some of these 10 or so guys that we've talked about, as well as some of these other 3.5 and 4-star prospects. There's definitely going to be interesting options for us in the second round. If we were to go with a hitter in the first round, I think I am leaning towards Little, which Noglegs and DLL First Base 14 recommended. He is, to me, potentially a better version of Hidero Endo. And given what Endo's done for us this year, admittedly, it's a half-season sample size, and he's been getting worse each month as the season's gone on. But it has opened my eyes a little bit to being more willing to go with guys who are below average in contact and avoid strikeouts, particularly if they've got that incredible home run power and a pretty good eye. So if we were to go with a position player, I think I'm leaning towards Little, simply because that would also open up a lot of options for us if a more expensive player falls to the second round. But we haven't even talked about the pitchers yet, and that's where there's a bounty of interesting players, and there were also some pretty strong opinions from our worldwide scouting department. And I'll start out talking about the players that no one recommended that strongly. Among the 5-star guys, Luis Reveles, 18-year-old, potential 3 to 4 pitch arsenal, but could conceivably end up with a 2-pitch arsenal. Fragile physically, barely throwing 90, although he is only 18 years old. Not going to go with a fragile guy who conceivably might end up in the bullpen despite his incredible stamina, who's also looking for $10.5 million with the number 2 overall pick. So I kind of agree with the viewers in that he was not mentioned as someone to push particularly hard for. Similarly, Devin Argueta, another guy who wasn't mentioned by any viewers, potentially just a 3-pitch arsenal. Looks like he can be above average with stuff, movement, and control. Decent stamina, decent at holding on runners, throws in the low to mid-90s. Certainly a solid pitching prospect, only looking for slot. If he's around in the second round, I think he could be really interesting, but not a guy we're going to go for here. And then Josh Mangano, 17-year-old, pretty interesting. Another guy, though, who's going to be reliant on that changeup developing to be able to be an effective starter, most likely. And if that changeup doesn't develop, his stuff is not going to be nearly as imposing as it looks. Do love that he's a 17-year-old already throwing in the mid to high 90s, has high work ethic, he has durability, only looking for slot. Mangano and Argueta particularly, but obviously Reveles as well, although the money with him is a little bit more of an issue. But if either of these high schoolers only looking for slot were to fall to the second round, I think they'd be very intriguing options for us, and it's not impossible that one or both of them would. But now it's time to get into the decisions of the 6 players that I'm still thinking about as far as pitchers with this number 2 pick that we haven't talked about yet. And 3 of them are high schoolers, 3 of them are college players. So we're going to have a lot of interesting things to talk about. Start with the high school players. Steve Genus, noted by Dodo Dude, Samuel Overend, Ball Sherlock, as a potential guy to go after. Looking for a ton of money, so bringing him on board would limit our flexibility a bit going forward. But he's got the potential to have a 6-pitch arsenal, so almost certainly will be a pretty interesting major league starting prospect. We think his stuff, his movement and control could all be well above average. Stuff world class, and the control not far off of that. Not great at holding on runners. He's going to want to get paid, which you can already kind of tell by his bonus demand. But not really any holes in his game. And 9 heads Genus is certainly a very interesting prospect. Chris Patterson, also looking for a lot of money, $12 million. Christian Wilson, Bald Sherlock, Samuel Overend, DLL first base 14 among the scouts who put in favorable reports on Cowboy Patterson. Could have a 4-pitch arsenal. Most likely will at least be 3, even if that curve doesn't develop. We think his changeup is not too far off major league quality. 19 years old, throwing in the mid to high 90s, high work ethic. If everything goes well, 70 stuff, 65 movement, and 70 control is certainly the profile of an ace. So he is very interesting to me as well. Last but not least, Jaheim Pennyman. Not my 4-ply, Samuel Overend and Bald Sherlock, all like Mr. Pennyman. He is looking for fewer pennies than those other 2 high schoolers that we talked about. Pretty clean profile with the high work ethic, high intelligence, low greed. Stamina is more than acceptable. Hold runners, not great, but not horrible. Ground ball pitcher, throws in the low to mid 90s. Like the fact that he's got a potential 6-pitch arsenal. Question whether the sinker's ever really going to be full major league quality, but 5 of his pitches at this point are 40 or 45 on a major league scale. So feel like his stuff is likely to be pretty robust. His movement, not necessarily as good as a couple of the other high schoolers. Right now, looks like he's going to give up a fair amount of homers, but we do think he's got potential to take that down, and does have ground ball tendencies and ground baller pitcher type, which should help him, and above average control. So he is a real interesting prospect as well. I think Pennyman, the personality is really clean. He's looking for less money, and with the potential for 6 pitches, with that personality, I think the bust potential for Pennyman is a little less than it is with Patterson or Genus. But I think that the ceilings of Patterson and Genus are probably higher than they are for Pennyman. Both Genus and Patterson, if they reach their full potential, are perennial Cy Young Award candidates if they reach their full potential. Pennyman, honestly, though, with 75 stuff, 55 movement, and 65 control, if he really reaches his full potential, those are the numbers of a perennial Cy Young Award candidate as well. So love the ceilings of all 3 of the high school players. Just a matter of how much money we'd be willing to use in terms of potentially our handcuffing ourselves a bit in future rounds, and whether with the fact that we've been a losing team for 4.5 seasons now, and we've been more focused on high schoolers than college players in the draft. Can we afford to keep building for 3, 4, 5, 6 years in the future? Or do we need to get some college players on board to ensure that we can actually keep our job for 3, 4, 5, 6 years into the future? And that question, that conundrum, and that potential balancing act is what brings us to the 3 college players that we need to think about. Alan Walling, at least according to our scout, with the 5-star potential, has the highest ceiling. He's also looking for pretty significant money at $9.5 million. But Walling was certainly one of the most popular players with our scouts. John Maloney, the notorious KEV, Bald Sherlock, Noglegs, Dodo Dude, all recommended Specs Walling. 22-year-old coming out of the University of Southern Indiana. Looks pretty close to Major League ready right now, with 45 stuff, 50 movement, and 40 control. Potential 3 to 4 pitch arsenal at 22 years old. Not sure how much that changeup is going to develop, so he may only be a 3-pitch guy, but he is far enough along in his development that I think he can be an effective major leaguer with those 3 pitches. Love the extreme ground ball tendencies. Love the incredible ability that he has to hold on runners. Certainly more than enough stamina. So there is a lot to like about him. My concerns, he's 22 years old, and he only throws in the low 90s, so that's probably not going to improve too much. I don't love that he's only been facing a fair level of competition at USI. I don't know if that's technically what they're known as, but that's what I'm going to call them. And certainly he doesn't have the same type of ceiling as the high schoolers that we've talked about. But if he does reach his full potential, a guy with 60 stuff, 60 movement, and 65 control is the best pitcher on our pitching staff. And it's not inconceivable that Walling could be pitching for us in September in just a few months. Pretty close to Major League ready, and would certainly help this struggling Major League team be more competitive next season, almost certainly, and with some probability later this season as well. Another college lefty, Juan Amarias, was recommended by Marilee Murphy, Mark Jaquette, Bald Sherlock, and Dodo Dude. Bummer Amarias, a lot of them noted, not going to give up many home runs, already has major league average movement and potentially an incredible ability to keep balls in the park, which combined with his extreme ground ball tendencies and his ground baller pitcher type means, and playing half of his games in Oakland means this is a guy who's not going to give up a lot of long balls. Does potentially have a 4-pitch arsenal, and those 4 pitches are close to major league quality today. Don't think his stuff is ever going to be exceptional, but average stuff with well above average movement and above average control is still a pretty interesting combination. Throws a bit harder than Mr. Walling, which I like. Has been facing a higher level of competition at UVA, and he's also looking for less money. So Bummer Amarias, also interesting to me. And then last, but possibly not least, is a guy who we talked about back when we first looked at this draft, right when the season was getting underway. Our scout only sees him as having 4-star potential, so he's not viewed as one of the true blue chippers in this draft. But he is a guy that we've had our eye on for the last few months, and Christian Wilson, Not My Four Ply, and DLL, First Base 14, all still have their eyes on him as well. Steel Arm Johnny, and actually there were a few others who mentioned him as well, and I apologize. I didn't mention everyone with every player that they liked, but Steel Arm Johnny is popular as well, looking for $8 million, so in between both of the other college pitchers that we talked about at IU, faced a great competition level. 22 years old like the others, right-hander. The other two were lefties. He throws significantly harder than the other two guys. Still has those extreme ground ball tendencies, enough stamina. Not great at holding on runners. Not the best leader in the world. Does potentially have a 4-pitch arsenal. Even that cutter is not far off major league quality. If everything works out, 60 stuff, 60 movement, 55 control. So another guy who is in position where he would be the best pitcher on our pitching staff, particularly in the rotation, probably within the next year, year and a half if we brought him on board. Doesn't, again, have the same ceiling as some of those high school pitchers. But again, even if we pick a great high school pitcher, number 2 overall this year, and they end up being a future Hall of Famer, we may not end up being their general manager by the time they make it to the majors if this A's team doesn't start winning some games soon. And I think I know who I'm going to go with if I go with a college pitcher. And it's going to upset many of you because it will be the player that was the least popular of the college pitchers, although we did still have multiple highly respected scouts recommending him. But if we go with a pitcher number 2 overall who's a college pitcher, we're going to go with Jeremy Martin. Doesn't have the same high end as some of the others. In fact, as I noted, with potential for 60 stuff, 60 movement, and 55 control, he has almost certainly the lowest ceiling of any of the pitchers that we're still talking about. But I also feel like with the fact that he's throwing in the mid to high 90s, he's got a potential 4-pitch arsenal. He's been facing a great level of competition at Indiana, that he's pretty close to a can't-miss prospect. Now, on a really good team, he's probably a 2 or a 3. I don't think even on some bad teams he's a number 1. But a good solid second or third starter is something this A's team could certainly use, and it's very conceivable he would be our number 1 starter in very short order. Amarias, it was a tough decision. I got a tough time taking a pitcher number 2 overall if I think his stuff is, in a best case scenario, only average. And that's ultimately what made me go with Martin over Amarias. And a lot of you are going to be shouting at me about Walling. I do agree that when you look at the ceiling, if everything goes well, Walling's 10 points better in control than Martin is, and his stuff and his movement are just as good. He's pretty close to major league ready. I just don't think he's as toolsy. I think he ultimately is a 3-pitch starter. I don't love that he barely throws 90 miles an hour. And I'm being a bit of a snob here, but the fact that he played at the University of Southern Indiana while Jeremy Martin has excelled playing in the Big Ten at IU, factors into my decision making. So it's going to be Steel Arm Johnny if we go with a college player. But are we going to go with a college player? I know that even those of you who are upset that I didn't pick the college pitcher that you recommended are likely screaming at me right now to at least go with Steel Arm Johnny over some high school prospect who I'm going to be fired before he's in A-ball. And that is a very compelling argument. But with the number 2 overall pick in the entire draft, there's also an argument that you should be getting someone who is a franchise-changing player rather than just a good number 2 or number 3 starter. And I think these 3 teenagers could all fit that bill. Steve Genus has an incredible profile if everything works out. 6 potential pitches. Stuff, movement, and control off the charts. The only negative thing I say about him is that with that $13.5 million bonus demand, he's going to limit our flexibility a lot in round 2. And I do think there's a pretty good likelihood that there will be an expensive player that we like a lot in round 2. Chris Patterson is incredibly well balanced, should be well above average in his stuff, movement, and control. Throws in the mid to high 90s, even though he just turned 19 years old. Concerns with him is the bonus demand is almost as high as Mr. Genus, and he could only potentially be a 3-pitch guy. Which leaves us to Jaheim Pennyman. 75 stuff, 55 movement, and 65 control if everything works out. Sounds incredibly attractive. But to be fair, his ceiling doesn't seem as high as Genus or Patterson's. He is, however, not looking for as much money as those guys. Pretty clean personality. And as a 18-year-old, he's got 5 pitches that are pretty much major league quality right now. Close to major league quality. With the ability to add a 6th if he can develop that cutter. So it's an interesting decision for me. And I'll freely admit with the decision that I would make on the high schoolers, I'm talking out of both sides of my mouth because I'm saying if we go with a high schooler, we want to get a guy who's got an incredible ceiling. And if I go with the high schooler, I am going to go with Jaheim Pennyman, who I admit has the lowest ceiling if everything works out of those 3 players. But he's looking for less money, so that gives us the flexibility when we get to the second round and a player that we really like drops to us, which I think is going to happen. And I think with that high work ethic that he has, with that potential for a 4-5 or quite possibly a 6-pitch arsenal, and with the fact that although you look at his ratings and allowing the home runs is the big concern, I think that with his ground ball tendencies and his ground baller pitcher type, he will likely improve in that area and mitigate the weakness over time. Although I don't think his ceiling is as high as Genus or Patterson's, I think his floor and his likelihood of success is a little bit higher. It's certainly not perfect. I mean, you look at Patterson with his 40 stuff and his 45 movement today, and he's not that far off major league quality as a 19-year-old if he can get his control under wraps. But I think we're going to go with Pennyman if we go with a high school pitcher. And I've decided we are going to go with a pitcher. So the question is, do we go with the high schooler, Pennyman, who certainly has a higher ceiling, but a much lower floor, and isn't going to be able to help us for several years, by which point we might also be out of a job? Or do we go with Mr. Martin, who can likely be helping us in the majors this September and will quite conceivably be our number one starter next spring, and can help us get this team to 500 and get this team to where it's ultimately winning more games than it's losing. There's an argument for both. I think there's probably a stronger and more logical argument for the college player Martin. And I know some of you are saying, forget about Martin, take Walling or Amarias instead. We'll see if maybe the mock draft tells us which direction to go. Genus and Patterson, the two expensive high schoolers, supposed to go 6th and 8th. Walling, 12th, is a college player. Martin, who we're considering 15th, is a college player. And then we wait. Pennyman doesn't go until 28th to the Dodgers. And it seems like there's another pitcher that we've been talking about. Or have I missed him? Amarias. I must have missed him. I'm sure he was... Amarias, I missed him. He was 7th. He was between the high schoolers, Genus and Patterson. So of the 6 pitchers that we've talked about and have been recommended to us, the 2 that I'm considering went 5th and 6th of the pitchers on this list. Now, granted, the mock draft is not necessarily going to be 100% accurate. I mean, they've got Luis Reveles, who with his fragility and with the fact he may only be a 2-pitch guy, they've got him as the first pitcher overall going 4th to the Rockies with his fragility and his not great ability to keep the ball in the park at this point, although to be fair, he's also a ground baller pitcher type. So I don't know how much stake I put into that. And with the exception of Not My Four-Ply, Samuel Overend, and Bald Sherlock, we're going to make what I'm sure is going to be a very unpopular decision. And we are going to take the high schooler, Pennyman, here with the 2nd overall pick. I feel like taking one of the more economical players that I really like at number 2 could help us turn this into a monster draft, depending on the way things go going forward. Genus and Patterson, I think, are going to be gone despite their huge price tags. And Walling is a 5-star prospect who's not far off major league quality, likely will be as well. I don't think that Amarius or Martin are going to be around, but as a 4.5-star prospect and a 4-star prospect, at least according to our scout, and I'm going to trust our scout more than others, I think there's a chance, not a good one, but there's some chance that an Amarius or a Martin falls to us in the second round, and we end up with the ability to get two players that we really like with our first two picks. And we're not even talking about position players yet. But if we went with a Jennings or a Patterson, that kind of locks us in. Whereas with what we are going to have to spend on Pennyman, as I said, we can make some trades, bring back a little bit of cash. If need be, we can rob Peter to pay Paul a little bit. Not optimal to be potentially moving money out of our development budget, given that developing players is our entire strategy at this point and not necessarily one that we've done that well with. But if the draft breaks perfectly for us, we brought Pennyman on board, who's a player that we really like, and there's a chance we're going to be able to bring a second player that we like as much, if not potentially more than Pennyman in the second round. And you know the pitchers that I'm hoping might fall to us. I don't think that they're going to, given where they were supposed to go in the draft. But we're going to go ahead and auto draft until our next pick. Take a look at the position players that are available before we turn our attention to the pitchers and see if my rolling the dice comes up craps or not. So position-wise, still a couple of the 5-star prospects in the catcher, Mitch McLaren, the center fielder, Jimmy Simpson, still around. And then a lot of these 4-star guys who I've looked at that we haven't even talked about. So some pretty interesting options in the pool of batters. But did our crazy, perhaps desperate plan work as far as the pitchers who are available? And it did not, as far as the guys that we were talking about before, but it did in terms of some other guys. We talked about Josh Mangano earlier. No one recommended him to us, but as a supplemental high school guy in the second round, he's kind of interesting. Johnny Hayes out of Cal is a guy who could help soon. The question is whether he would be helping soon as a starter or as a reliever. So it didn't work out perfectly, and I didn't think it would. We'll have to check the draft log and just see where those guys went. Amarius went 5th. Patterson and Jennings went 3-4 right after Pennyman. Walling went 8th, and Martin went 9th. So all of the pitchers actually went very quickly, and in many cases even earlier than they were expected to, which isn't something that I've seen in a ton of drafts here in OOTP 25. So we're still going to get a chance to make a pretty interesting selection here in the second round, but it's not going to be the slam dunk super success that we had some small probability at. And there are several position players that I like. So I am going to roll the dice that one of them will be around in the third round. And we're going to make a riskier move here, and we're going to go with Josh Mangano. I am concerned that if that slider and changeup, or if the slider or changeup doesn't develop, he's a reliever. But he's got high work ethic. He's durable. We've got great coaching. He's a 17-year-old who throws in the high 90s, and he's only looking for slot. So it's going to still leave us some flexibility if we have to get a little more creative financially with a third round pick. And like I said, there's 5 or 6 position players that I like, and I'm going to roll the dice that one of them falls to us. If not, there's still some options as far as pitchers as well. Scouting director recommends the catcher, Mitch McLaren. As we talked about last round, I really like the bat. If he's around in the third round, especially with the money he's looking for, he's a guy we'd certainly think about. Mangano is by no means a sure thing, but we're also in a position where I think we just need to add some pitching talent into this organization. We've been a bit more focused in the last couple drafts and the last couple IAFA periods on using our early picks and our big dollars on potential everyday players. So we're going to go with Mangano here and see which batters are available. And there's guys that I really like here in the third round. So I will walk through them with you, but this played out pretty well. And there are about 5 guys that I'd feel good taking here in the third round. We've already looked at the catcher, Mitch McLaren. That bat for a third rounder is pretty interesting, and the money's not bad. Similarly, Dave Ackley, durable catcher, a little better defensively. Probably not quite as good a bat, but still pretty solid. Abri Colmone is impossible to sign. Maybe we take a flyer on him in the 5th round or something, but not a guy that we're going to pick here in the third. Brendan Johnston, right fielder, pretty well-balanced player, durable, competent defensively. Frank Maldonado, really good contact hitter, fine at everything else, like the high work ethic. But the guy that we're going to go with is one of the 2 guys that I really hoped would fall to us. The other one is not here, but it's the shortstop, Chris Clow. 18-year-old, very well-balanced bat. If he fully develops, he's above average at everything offensively with pretty good home run power, above average speed, and he is a competent defensive player. I think he could be a very good third baseman. If you had to play him at second or short, you certainly could. And he could certainly also play a corner outfield position for you. He's small, 6 foot, 150 pounds, only looking for $800,000. And I think for a third round pick, he's a pretty solid guy to bring into our organization. The scout still recommends McLaren. Who knows, if McLaren's around in the 4th round, maybe it's possible, but we're going to go with Chris Clow right now in the 3rd. And in the 4th, those catchers are still around along with Brendan Johnston. So I don't know if this is setting up quite like last year's draft, where I felt like we were getting players we loved through 8, 9, 10 rounds, but we're 4 rounds into it and still feeling like we have got a lot of interesting players on the market. And here in the 4th round, we're just going to play the numbers game. These 4 catchers have been sitting on the market through 4 full rounds. I think at least 1 or 2 of them are going to be available. Jimmy Hewitt, we haven't talked about. He's got a bat similar to the others. He is the worst defensively, probably along with Colmone and his impossible demands. These are the two who are probably more likely to still be around. I think I like McLaren and Ackley more, but I don't love them so much more that I'm not willing to go with Brendan Johnston. Now, granted, his bat not necessarily all that much better than these catchers, but a better contact hitter. He's durable. He's a left-handed hitter. He's only a competent defensive outfielder. So he's a left fielder, a right fielder, or a DH. But if he develops that 65 contact and 65 power, would happily put him in those positions. And as I said, I think that we'll get a crack at a catcher in the 5th round. I don't think we'll get a crack at Johnston, so we'll go ahead and draft him. And in the 5th round, all 4 of the catchers are still there, so I think that made sense. There's also some pitchers we've been keeping an eye on. Nobody that we love, but again, with a 5th round pick, maybe we go back to pitcher, assuming that all 4 of those catchers aren't going to come off the board before our next pick. And as much as I like Mitch McLaren's bat, 60 contact, 70 power, average gap power, average eye, the fact that we think Dave Ackley is a little bit better in every defensive aspect and still his 60 contact, 65 power, a little worse gap power, similar eye, he's durable. I won't hate it if McLaren's still around in the next round and we can go back-to-back catchers in the 5th and 6th round. But we're going to go with Ackley here. And McLaren's still around, so unless one of the pitchers I've had my eye on is still there, I think we will go back-to-back with the catchers. And there are pitchers I like, but to get a guy who our scout has 5-star potential in the 6th round is pretty good value, even if we have to move him off of catcher. He could play first base. If the bat completely develops, he could be a DH, certainly, with that 70 power. We think he's average or above average at everything offensively, so I think McLaren is pretty good value for a 6th round pick, so we are going to finally bring him on board. And will one of our pitchers be available? There are a couple that we've been looking at. And they're different prospects with Alejandro Castillo and Rodolfo Quintanilla. Castillo, potentially outstanding stuff. Worry a little bit about the movement, but he potentially has good control. He potentially could have a 4-pitch arsenal if everything went well and be a starter. Whereas Quintanilla is definitely a reliever, but we think he could be a pretty good one with stuff that could be off the charts if that changeup develops, like the high work ethic. Don't love either of these guys. You know, they barely throw in the 90s. They're not perfect prospects, but that's why they're around in the 7th round. And we're going to go with Castillo, the starter. Draft him in the 7th. Quintanilla is still available in the 8th. And I have been looking at players offline just to help the viewers who I know are going to want me to look at these college guys. Alfredo Acevedo, 21-year-old out of Puerto Rico. Fragile. Could be a only 1-pitch guy, although he is closer to the majors. And Ernesto Arratia, another guy who is most likely a middle reliever if he completely develops. So we're going to go with Quintanilla because if that changeup does develop and that stuff gets to where we think it could, I think he could be a more useful reliever, do like the high work ethic. So we'll take Quintanilla here in the 8th round. And now it's time for me to do a little more research before our next pick. And we're going to actually go with a third catcher among our 9 picks, Jimmy Hewitt, who we talked about before. Like the bat, switch hitting catcher. Don't love him at catcher, but he actually is a guy who could play corner outfield. He could play first base. He's got some options as a switch hitter if that bat fully develops. I don't think he's bad value for a 9th rounder, so we're going to go ahead and draft Mr. Hewitt here. And it's been a long draft, but I do kind of like where we've gotten this team through the first 9 picks that we've made. I know some of you are going to disagree, actually, just by the numbers. Many of you, most of you, will disagree with what we've done. Definitely was not an easy decision for me with the early picks this year. Honestly, the later picks have gotten simpler for me, but we are in a position where we're going to be able to easily sign everyone for the money that we've budgeted, which is always nice. And I am going to actually finish up the episode now. I know I've still got 11 rounds ahead of me with some of the less interesting players and prospects, but I know this episode's also been going on a long time at this point with my hemming and hawing over what to do in the first round and going through all of those players. And it's also just personally getting a bit late at night, so I'm going to go through those next 11 rounds likely tomorrow rather than today. Not that the decisions are going to be as impactful as these in the first 9 were, but haven't brought on the college player that many of you have been shouting at me to bring on for several seasons at this point, and the question is whether that will come back to haunt us. It's not going to be the sole reason that we lose our job, but certainly if we are one dice roll away from losing our job and a couple extra wins over the next season and a half would have got us to save our job, foregoing some of those college players may come back to haunt us. But we'll never really know if that's the case, so it'll all just be supposition and rumor and innuendo anyways. But I can't say I love the draft, especially given that we had the 2nd overall pick. Certainly put a lot of pressure onto young Mr. Pennyman. But I do like him as an 18-year-old. 5 pitches that aren't far off major league quality, potential 6-pitch arsenal, high work ethic, good stamina, and we think his stuff could be exceptional, his movement above average and his control well above average. Not a perfect prospect, but not a bad prospect either, and we're going to be investing heavily in Mr. Pennyman for years to come. And with that, we will call it an episode. Until the next time around, thanks so much for watching, and hope you have a great day.